Hi, this is Joy at Pine Quilt Shop. Today we're going to talk about the brand new Stripology ruler. This is the brand new Stripology Quarters Mini Ruler. So what makes this ruler unique is the fact that, like the other Stripology rulers, it has slots at every ½ inch, but it also has slots that are 1/4 of an inch apart. So you have a lower set that is spaced every ½ inch, and you have this upper tier of slots, and they are spaced every 1/4 of an inch apart. So you have halves and quarters going across this ruler. This is the only Stripology ruler that has slots at both the ½ and 1/4 inch point. Like all the other Stripology and Creative Grids rulers, it comes with a wonderful set of printed instructions. There's a QR code on here that you can scan that will take you to a how-to video on how to use the ruler, and it has the great Creative Grids grip strips that are part of the ruler that are on the back side to help keep it from slipping. This ruler came out in conjunction with a brand new book from Goodwin Erla of GE Designs called Master Your Stripology Rulers. And this book has a lot of cutting tips in it and has a lot of cutting charts for you to use. And we're going to show you how to use these in a little bit. So we're going to start with just some basic cutting. When you are cutting with these rulers, you do want to make sure that you get your fabric folded square. I normally recommend that you do that using the line side of your cutting mat. I have mine flipped over just to not have distracting lines kind of distracting with you seeing what's the ruler markings. But you do want to make sure that when you fold it, this lines up and this lines up. Now this is a mini ruler. It's designed to cut fat quarters, fat eighths, basically half the width of fabric type shape fabrics and scraps. It's not made to cut big full width of fabric pieces because you would end up folding it too many times. So I have roughly a fat eighth here. I folded it in half and I folded it again, and I made sure that my folds were both nice and square when I had the line side of my ruler up. So I'm going to lay this down and I'm going to line that horizontal 0 line up with the fold in my fabric, the bottom fold. I'm looking here at the top and again kind of checking to make sure that I'm nice and square. And I'm going to start by cutting in the 0 slot. And I'm going to cut 1 1/4 inch pieces. So I will cut in the 1 1/4 and I will cut in the 2 1/2. Now it works really good to also line, to go ahead and mark this what you're going to cut with the GE Designs ruler stickers. That's a good way to mark them if you have to cut a lot of a size. And she does have a star by all the 1 1/2 inch cuts, but I was cutting 1 1/4. So there are 2 1 1/4 inch strips cut. I could have cut more if I had wanted to, but I'm going to show you next how to go ahead and make squares. So I will normally unfold these strips, and again typically would use the line side of my ruler, and I would line these strips up with a line on my ruler to make sure that I'm laying my strips down and they're square. So it's good to do that and use the lines on your ruler when you are doing that. And I will go ahead and cut in the 0. I bumped my ruler there. I'm just going to slide over a little bit, square up one more time. I'm trying to cut at a little bit of an angle so that you guys can see as if you were cutting, and it's not putting me in the best cutting position. I'll do my 1 1/4 and I'll do my 2 1/2. So got a little extra square up there, move that away, and there are the squares that I cut. Now you can always cut rectangles with this too. If I wanted to cut a rectangle, I can do that as well. So I'll square up again, and maybe I would want to do a 3 1/4 inch rectangle. I can go ahead and do that. So you can cut both squares and rectangles with the ruler. Cut your strips and then flip them around, and you can cut squares or rectangles, either one. So the next thing that I want to show you is how to cut 1/8 inch increments using the ruler. So this is a time when it is going to be super handy to use the book so that we don't have to do the math. So the first thing that we're going to do is to find the cutting 1/8 inch increments page in the book. And I'm going to cut 1 1/8 inch strips, so I'm going to follow the chart instead of doing the math by hand. So the first round of cutting that I'm going to do, I'm going to cut in the 0 slot, and I'm going to cut in the 2 1/4, and I'm going to cut in the 4 1/2. And now I'm going to go ahead and pull my scrap out, and I am going to line this 1/8 inch line, that dotted 1/8 inch line, up with the edge of my fabric. So rather than lining the 0 slot up, I'm going to line that 1/8 inch line up. So we will line that up. And I'm going to cut what they say to cut after you've moved the ruler 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to cut in the 1 inch. And I'm going to cut in the 3 1/4 inch. So we're cutting basically every other strip. And I'm going to cut in the 5 1/2. And now I have cut a whole bunch of 1 1/8 inch strips, and I have been able to cut a whole bunch at once, not just one at a time, by using the charts and cutting in the correct increments. So I'm able to cut a whole bunch at one time with that. Now I could also flip these and cut squares out of them if I wanted to. The next thing that I want to show you about the ruler, and I can probably have Nate go ahead and he can swing around to the other side for the rest of this, I think. And we will show you a couple more things that you can do with the ruler. So the ruler has these little dashed lines on both sides. And you've got your diagonal line printed on the ruler, and you've got the little dashed line, and you have one on this side. The left side is best for left-handers generally. The one on the right side is best for right-handers. And that is used to let you cut something on point. Now, if you cut something on point with a traditional ruler, you would line up your ruler with those two corners, and you would cut on the diagonal. And what happens when you start to cut on the diagonal, you see that little ripple? I don't know if you guys can see it on the camera, but you get a ripple moving ahead, and that corner tends to push in, and it happens because you're cutting on the bias. If you cut with the, I call it the wing line, if you cut with the little wing line on this ruler, the nice thing is that you are stabilizing that bias with the ruler. Having the ruler placed on top of both sides of that will stabilize the bias, and you will end up with a nice perfect cut because you've stabilized the bias on both sides of the cut instead of just one side like you do with the traditional ruler, where you tend to sometimes still have a little movement happening because of the fact that you're cutting on the bias. The next thing that I want to show you is using the ruler as a square up tool. So before we were cutting with this side of the ruler where we have those 1/2 and 1/4 inch markings, we're going to rotate it to the square up side. And the square up side has alternating black and white boxes that give you the sizes. So if you want to do a 1 3/4 inch square, it's marked a 2 1/4, 2 3/4, 3 1/4. And the handy thing with this ruler is I used to always have to kind of trace down the slots to figure out which slot gave me the side of that square. They've extended the markings to the bottom, so you actually have your slots marked down here for 3 1/4 or the various size squares, so it's easy to figure out which slot you're going to be cutting in. If you are squaring up blocks, that are half square triangles. You've got diagonal lines printed that you can line up on your seam line, so you know that you have your block nice and square before you trim. If you have quarter square triangles, you have diagonal lines going both ways. Depending on what kind of block you're squaring up, you might use that nice big crosshair in the center to find the center of your block before you go ahead and square up. And the cool thing about the Stripology rulers is you can square up two sides of the block at one time. So you can do two sides at once, rotate the block the other way, and do the other two sides. So it's quick to square up versus traditional rulers where many times you're only cutting one side at a time. These rulers also work great if you are fussy cutting. So if you wanted to fussy cut a motif, they are handy for that as well. So if I wanted to fussy cut that little coffee cup, I can pretty easily go ahead and lay my ruler down here and see where I'm getting it centered. So the 2 3/4 inch black square works pretty well to cut this. It actually has a little bit extra space around it. So you can quickly figure out what size you need, what size you could fussy cut something at. And then because you have the 1/4 inch markings, it's very easy to add your 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides around it. So 1/2 inch total, 1/4 inch on each side. So if I look at it and say, well, that would not cut the motif, but I want to cut it fairly tight, you can bump out to that next 1/4 inch line and very easily find the correct size to cut a motif at. The ruler also is good when you're squaring up blocks that have gotten a little bit thick. So if you have a lot of seams coming together and you start to get some thickness to the block, if you're fussy cutting, say, a machine embroidery block or hand embroidery block, the thread tends to add a little bit of thickness to the block. So when you're cutting with a traditional ruler that's totally flat, they tend to sometimes rock on you. The Stripology rulers have a little bit of flex. There's a little bit of flex where those strips are, so they actually are pretty good from a standpoint of cutting thicker blocks, blocks with lots of seam lines or lots of threads, such as an embroidery block, because they'll flex a little bit and the ruler will still lay flat, which always makes it easier to get an accurate cut when your ruler is laying nice and flat. So those are just the basic cutting that you can do with the ruler. Very versatile ruler, great for cutting those smaller pieces of fabric, and adding the book in to it gives you a lot of other ideas of things that you can use your Stripology rulers for. So that is the brand new Stripology Quarters Mini Ruler. You can find both of these items on our website at www.redpinequiltshop.com.